Leaders in development must be able to read and navigate local politics. We asked leaders in development to discuss this and to provide examples of someone doing this well.
So I'll continue for a moment with the example of the establishment of the Institute for Urban Indigenous Health, because it sounds today like it's such a good organisation, and one could believe it always was, but one has to understand the heavy lifting that was done to establishment, and that very much involved navigating community politics. So we had a situation where there were 4 independent Aboriginal medical services operating across southeast Queensland. They had done so for decades, and all of a sudden they were being asked to come into a regional model, and the boundaries of their service catchment areas had become fairly blurred. There was some overlap in service models, there were gaps in service models, and people saw it as a threat to the ongoing existence of their organisation, as a takeover, and that sort of thing. So the way in which the leadership dealt with that was full-on engagement of local communities, of the boards of those organisations, of sharing information, being transparent about it, but also being intolerant to not wanting to improve Indigenous health outcomes, and where we had evidence of things that weren't being done, we weren't afraid to show it. So I think that I wouldn't underestimate the pain that was endured during that process, but I'm a great believer if you get the process right, the outcome will be great. Bad process, bad outcome, and you'll be plagued by it forever and a day. And we brought communities on that journey with us, and they were worked with to believe in the change and how it would impact on them and improve their lives and those of their families and the community, and that's what happened. The period from about 2007 to 2012, when I did a number of major reviews of Aboriginal health services for the Commonwealth Government, and one particular review I undertook resulted in a recommendation to defund an Aboriginal medical service, and that's not an easy thing to do. It was not without a lot of hard work and thought that I made that recommendation. But it was absolutely clear that the organisation wasn't delivering a service to the community, it wasn't meeting community expectations, and many in the community believed it should be shut down. At the same time, there were a small number who thought that I was the biggest enemy, and that taking away their medical service was taking away a part of that community. And it was a really tricky situation because we needed something to replace it, but we didn't think that continuing with what was there was going to meet need. So I was asked to stay on to try and work through what could be done to address local health need, and that required a process of engagement and bringing those who were so deeply opposed to the closure of the existing service on that journey, and to stop them from derailing the process thereafter. So at the end of the day, it was dealing with community politics.
A lot of the work that we've been doing with our teams in the Solomon Islands or in Melanesia more broadly is probably the best example we have of the kind of work that helps to solve a problem by collaboratively bringing in the expertise and inputs from outside, but also taking local knowledge and local politics really seriously. In a country like the Solomon Islands, which became a very prominent issue, or country issue, in the early 2000s with the civil war that occurred there, was a very strong response from the external community led by Australia to try and find a very quick solution to a justice problem there. And that was largely perceived to be one of providing more police or more criminal justice officials, or building nice new courthouses, or doing things that the aid system can do relatively problematically and with a straight face in terms of saying this is a legitimate use of public money. But a lot of the local people were very unimpressed by all of that, largely because in their minds that wasn't actually the problem. It wasn't that they didn't have adequate jails or adequate courthouses. The fact that most of the problems they were dealing with most of the time were actually much more prosaic disputes. It was though the accumulation of grievances around smaller disputes that was aggregating ultimately into these bigger disputes. And you need a very different kind of political space to navigate into disputes over land claims, disputes over land resources, and who actually owns these resources, so that who is authorised to do deals with mining companies or with other external actors when they come in and offer huge sums of money. And so the World Bank's job in that particular case was to really act as an honest broker in the first instance, and by virtue of being a very large actor, was able to play that role quite effectively. It was also able to do that because it wasn't just a big political actor. It was an actor coming to that space, having invested a lot of time and effort in understanding what local people themselves were nominating and prioritising as their problems, and being able to document that, not just make sensationalist claims about these things, being able to provide fieldwork evidence from months and months of work in all the corners of these countries to be able to show exactly, or at least more exactly, what kinds of problems were actually being encountered. And that's how you navigate a political space there. It's not just by wearing a fancier suit or twisting more arms. You do it by engaging with people to really try and understand what their situation actually looks like. And that's what the most important work that we can do. But it's messy, it takes a long time, it requires very strong commitments of people to actually live in countries for long periods of time. You can't just fly in, fly out and solve those kind of problems. And you build credibility the hard way. You build it the same way anybody builds credibility, is by paying your dues. And too often our aid system just isn't set up to do that.
One of the things that I think development professionals generally have been bad at is understanding that technical solutions are not going to necessarily work, and the fact that we've got some evidence that an intervention works doesn't mean that that intervention is going to be accepted. It's critically important, if you're going into a development setting, to understand the institutions, interests and alignments of all of the local stakeholders and players, so that you understand whether indeed there is a technically, politically feasible solution to a problem. Because if you simply come in with a technical solution and there's opposition to it, whether there are other interest groups that have got another solution, or people are perhaps going to lose some political power as a result of what you're doing, or for whatever reason, it's simply not going to work. So one of the lessons that I've learned is you've got to work where there's an intersection of interests. So you can't come in with a technical solution from outside and go, this worked really well in Mozambique, we're going to do it here. You really need to go in with a whole suite of tools, understand the context, understand where the champions are, understand where there's an opportunity to work with the grain, with the local political players, on something that they want to move forward with, where you've actually got some kind of solution or capacity to be able to help them.
So how does an organisation like Oxfam navigate local politics? I think the first point is, it's not me that does the navigating. The people who understand local politics are local people, local staff, local partners. An awful lot of what we do, the vast majority of it, is not done by local Oxfam staff. It's done by the partners we work with and support. And they are the ones who understand how things work. So last week I was in Myanmar, and one of the really interesting stories there was we were doing some work with local partners in a fairly peaceful part of Myanmar, and they were doing public hearings where local people would be asked to voice what was bothering them, what was upsetting them, what was annoying them. And a lot of what they were annoyed about was their land was being taken by different groups like police, or military or whatever. The local civil society organisations gathered all this material, and then they said, right, now, it's very important if we're going to get change that we don't force people in power to lose face, because that will polarise the discussion, they'll reject our findings, nothing will happen. So they issued two different reports. One report spoke in very general terms about not following proper process, on tendering procedures and all the rest of it. And then they did a private report to the people they were trying to influence saying, these people are stealing people's land. And a number of people resigned as a result, and we got some really good wins, but it was done through respecting and understanding local culture, local practice. Now that's the kind of thing where the white man in shorts who comes in and does that is never going to understand it. So the important thing is you have to empower local staff to make the right decisions, and even more important than that, find the right local partners who get this stuff and then back them.